As soon as Danny brought her into the house, I knew immediately that this lady was going to be nothing but trouble. Not that she was trouble, but she was going to bring me a whole world of trouble that wasn't her fault. That was the feeling I got when I looked up and saw her in the doorway. "Hello, Mr. Carter," she asked nervously. I could tell she was married, like most of my clients. "Nick Carter, ma'am." I nodded. No, not that punk singer, but I occasionally get mail for him. One of the hazards of being a private investigator with a famous name living in Los Angeles. My dad actually named me after a secret agent from the Jove Publishing spy novels. We already had a last name, but Dad just called me Nick, not Nicholas. Nick, so screw it. I stood up and shook her hand. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" "Your assistant said you could help me. I was referred by one of your previous clients." She smiled even wider, though she was still nervous. "I see. Okay, Mrs. I'm Janine Linder. My husband is Dennis Linder. He's a psychologist. I have reason to believe he's cheating on me, and I need proof before I file for divorce." She held out a picture of him to me. I raised an eyebrow, examining the picture. He looked to be in his early 40s, square jaw and dark hair graying at the temples. He had bright green eyes that would probably seduce most women. "Okay, ma'am. Do you know how this works?" I asked, and she nodded. "Okay, give me a maximum of 2 weeks and I'll have all the proof you need. For those 2 weeks, I charge $5,000. Is that okay with you?" "Yes, and half up front, right?" Uh, she asked. "So, do you have your own account that your husband doesn't know about or have access to in order to check your finances?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "I started it a couple months ago so he wouldn't find out I hired someone to spy on him. Your former client says you're the best." She smiled and handed me a cashier's check for $2,500. "Thank you, ma'am. Could you tell me about his suspicious behavior? The more information I get, the easier it will be to track his movements. Well, it's a little strange that I even realized he was cheating on me. He spends every night with me, and on weekends too. But sometimes when I call his office to invite him to lunch, his phone is disconnected," she said. "Well, maybe he hit a client during a session." I shrugged. "Normally you'd be right. But there's also the distance from home. He used to be all over me, and now he barely touches me." Then I noticed the smell of perfume on his clothes. At first I thought I was imagining it, but it wasn't my brand of perfume, she said. "Perhaps one of his clients was hugging him, and how old is he?" I asked. "He's 44, she said, and I nodded. I've heard that men experience less attraction at that age than they do before 40. Could that be the reason for his emotional distance?" "You sound like you think I'm stupid," she said angrily. "No, ma'am. I'm just trying to understand why you think he's cheating. I admit, perfume is a pretty strong indicator, but this could just be circumstantial evidence. I'm going to take the case, but I also need to know everything you can think of. How is he acting suspiciously, other than turning off his phone?" "Well, on Mondays and Wednesdays, he always calls before lunch. Sometimes he answers right away. But on days like that, he goes straight to voicemail." "Okay, I think I've got it. Tomorrow is Wednesday, so I'll start my investigation then. I'll contact you as soon as I have something concrete." I nodded, rising from my chair as she did, and shook her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. Honestly, I hope it's nothing. But I need peace of mind on this matter." She smiled warmly. She really was a beauty, and had I not been married, I might have considered comforting her. "Anytime, Mrs. Linder. If I don't find anything in 2 weeks, you won't have to pay me the rest of my fee," I told her. "That's my guarantee." "Thank you again, Mr. Carter," she said. "Ma'am, call me Nick. Mr. Carter was my father." I smiled, and she smiled back. "Okay, Nick, I'm Janine. Ma'am is too formal." "Okay, Janine. I'll get back to you as soon as I have something for you. Danny, my assistant, should have your information, so I'll get your number from her." I walked her out and promised to contact her again. As soon as Janine left, Danny walked in and sank into the padded chair in front of my desk. Daniela Velasquez had been my assistant for 6 years. Honestly, I'd be lost without her, and I think she knows it. She's single, dating, but not often. She has gorgeous black hair, brown eyes, and a gorgeous tan that she inherited from her Mexican ancestors. She looks like J. Lo Kama, but she has more junk in her trunk and a much bigger rack. Yeah, if I wasn't married to the woman of my dreams, Danny would be in trouble. I may be married, but I'm not dead and I'll never touch. Okay, Jefe. Here's what I have for you at the moment. She handed me the dossier she'd gathered online about our target. Danny's not a bad private investigator in her own right, and I'm proud to have trained her. She's a fast learner, that's for sure. Dennis Linder, psychologist extraordinaire. I glanced at the folder and an alarm bell rang in my head. It seems a former patient had filed a malpractice suit against him a couple years ago, but the suit had been mysteriously withdrawn with some formulaic response about why. This was getting more and more interesting. The former patient was a woman, and her husband divorced her shortly after the malpractice suit was withdrawn. This was a red flag. I had a bad feeling about Dr. David Linder, and my intuition usually isn't wrong. Danny, dig a little deeper about this asshole, will you? I have a bad feeling about him, I said, and Danny giggled at my phrasing. Haha, yeah, I know. I opened the door for him, and thanks for not stepping through it. Anytime, boss. She winked at me sweetly, then stepped back to her desk to do some more Bing searches about Dr. Dumbass. Daniela is twice her gold, and I know I don't pay her enough, even though I pay her very well. We are more like partners than boss and assistant. We split every case 60/40, including fees. Those fees, when added up between several clients, add up to over $200K a year. After expenses, I usually get $150K and Danny gets $110K, and that's after taxes. We have a common attorney who provides us with quid pro quo legal assistance because we kind of work for him as well. His name is Wesley Quentin, and divorce proceedings and other domestic issues are his game. And then there's my wife, Samantha. Yes, Samantha Carter, formerly Samantha Stern. No relation to Colonel Carter from Stargate SG-1. She goes by Sammy for short. I met Sammy 7 years ago when I retired from the company I worked for in Langley, Virginia, and moved back to Los Angeles. I was an insurance investigator for that company. It was a decent life, but after one client in Paris turned out to be a real asshole, I decided I'd had enough and used my investigative skills at home. I had enough money saved up to start my own private detective business. There's no hiding anything now. Sammy is stunning. She is 5 feet 8 inches tall, which puts her in line with me when she puts on her 4-inch heels. I first met Sammy when I solved my first case for my first client. He threw a party to celebrate me finding and recovering his property. I was his guest of honor, and Sammy was the daughter of one of his friends. She saw me, I saw her, and we were magnetically drawn to each other. We talked and danced and talked some more. I met her father, a nice man, and he bought my usual line about being a former insurance investigator who had decided to go into private investigating. I got some prospects and managed to get a few more clients during the party. That was 7 years ago, and after 6 months of dating and 6 months together, we were married in a small ceremony with only her family and a few of our friends in attendance. My parents died a few years ago in a car accident while I was overseas, and left me their paid-for house in their will. And me, I spent 3 years in the Army as an interrogator, and then was recruited by the aforementioned company to investigate possible insurance fraud. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Anyway, I became a damn good investigator and realized I could make a hell of a lot of money as a private investigator. So I said goodbye to the company and went back home to Los Angeles. Getting a concealed carry license was like pulling teeth, but it was worth it to carry my dad's old Colt M1911A1 pistol. The big .45 ACP rounds practically guaranteed a kill if you shot accurately. That's something I've always been good at, shooting. So I went to where Danny was picking up the pieces of Dennis Linder's life and printing them out for me. Hey Danny, when you're done looking, disconnect for the day. I'm going home. I smiled at her. No problem, Jefe. She smiled back at me with more than professional respect. You know, I hope Sammy knows what's in her house. I think she does, honey. You know, you'll make some guy really happy someday if you ever settle down. I winked at her, flirting a little. No, Daddy. I missed my chance by a few months. She shrugged. I opened my mouth to ask her about it, but she had already turned back to her computer monitor. Okay, sweetie, gather your information, put it in a folder, and I'll come back in the morning and pick it up. Good night, I said, heading for the door. Good night, boss, she exclaimed as I walked out of the office. I got in my car and headed home. On the way, I started thinking about Sammy and how she had been acting lately. She had been kind of aloof the last couple months, like she had something on her mind and wanted to tell me about it. But all the time it seemed like something was holding her back. I decided that when I got home, I would ask her about it until she told me herself. I'd be an idiot if I didn't see the writing on the wall. I've seen enough of them over the years. The story has always been the same. The wife or husband was always emotionally detached either before or immediately after the affair began. To this day, she continues to tell me nothing when I ask her what's wrong or if she wants to talk to me about something. Why women respond with nothing, I will never know. I know a few who don't, but most of them seem to think us guys are paid enough to be mind readers. Sorry, ladies. We're not psychics. Sometimes you have to spell things out for us. It was with these thoughts in mind that I pulled onto our street and noticed a Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo parked in front of the house. As soon as I pulled into our driveway, my cell phone rang. "Hey, babe," I said, seeing my wife's name on the caller ID. "Hey, Nick. When are you going to be home? We need to talk to you about something," she said. Her voice sounded strange. "What do you mean, babe? Who is this we you're talking about?" I suspected the we was whoever was behind the wheel of the Jeep. "Just get home as soon as you can, okay?" "Okay, baby, I love you," I said. "Okay, bye." The alarm bells in my head had now turned into a full-fledged klaxon. I made sure my pocket recorder was in my pocket and ready to go, and my cell phone had the ability to take pictures. Just in case, I turned on the camera. I had no idea what had gotten into Sammy. She'd never professed her love for me, not even recently. But now? I breathed deeply, doing breathing exercises to calm myself down. Once the Zen vibe was established, I got out of the car and took a picture of the Jeep's license plate. I had a really bad feeling about this. My gut was screaming at me about it, and I always listened to my intuition. As soon as I walked through the door, I saw them kissing. They didn't even realize I was so close, and I managed to get a picture of them together. I walked into the room, calm and happy, and clicked my mouse until they noticed me. I pressed the record button on my pocket recorder, which was lying where else in my pocket. "Oh my God," Sammy said. "You scared me, Nick." "Care to explain why you're making out with some asshole in my house, future ex-wife?" I asked, raising an eyebrow and closing my phone. "That's part of the reason I wanted you to come home, Nick," she said. I looked at the asshole for the first time, and I had a sudden urge to grab my gun and put a hole in his head big enough for a Mack truck to drive through. Dennis Linder, my current target, stood in my living room, towering over me. The situation was not an easy one. My client's asshole husband was standing in my house and apparently entertaining my wife. At that moment, I wanted only one thing: to destroy him, and at the same time, her. My heart was breaking, but anger held the pain in check for now. However, if I wanted the money, I had to behave calmly. Revenge would come later. Payback was a bitch and a half, and these two were about to feel the full effects of it. "Okay, what do you want to talk about?" I asked, much calmer than I actually felt. "Mr. Carter, may I call you Nick?" Asshole asked. "No, only friends call me Nick. You're not a friend. You're an asshole who entertains my wife. Therefore, but by definition, we will never be friends. Got it?" I asked with a chuckle. "Yes, so, I'm Dr. Dennis Linder, and I treat your wife with therapy," he said, introducing himself. "Okay, does therapy include kissing my wife in my house?" I asked, raising an eyebrow again. "As a matter of fact, right now, I know it's very unusual and probably hard to swallow, but you'll have to watch us while we do it," he said. God, this guy was dumber than a box of bowling balls. He was playing into my hands, backing up not only my own divorce proceedings, but making sure his wife got everything but my alienation of affection and negligence lawsuits, which I was already planning. I only glanced at him for a moment. "Dr. Dennis Linder, isn't it? I hear you're really good at what you do, psychology, right?" I asked, sucking up to him. "Yes, psychology. My methods are sometimes controversial, but I always get results." He pouted. Said, "And how long has my wife been going to therapy with you?" I asked, holding back my own explosion that was straining and tearing out. "2 months now," he confirmed. Sammy didn't say anything about seeing a psychiatrist. I looked at her then. "Sammy, if it was so bad, why didn't you just talk to me? I told you years ago when we were dating that if anything was wrong, you could come to me. Don't you remember that?" I asked, trying to get through to her. I I guess, she replied hesitantly. A confused expression appeared on her face for a moment. Sammy, remember what we talked about, Dr. Dipshit said. Control. You have to assert your control. I know you don't like being helpless, so you have to take the lead. Remember? His voice was strange, almost hypnotic as he spoke to her, and I saw her expression become rigid. You're right, Dennis. I have to show him that I'm not just a stupid woman to be bossed around. Then she looked at me. Sammy, what are you talking about? I almost shouted. When have I ever made you do anything? In the bedroom. We always do it the way you want it done, not the way I want it done. She was almost yelling at me. Okay, Sammy, you know what we said after the wedding? That if we wanted to try something new, we'd just discuss it and see what happens. Remember? I asked. All you had to do was ask, and we could at least talk about it. Once again, the look on her face became confused. But before Dr. Fool could say anything, her expression turned hard again. Nick, I need to do this. You can either watch or not watch, but I'm going to do it, she said firmly. Sammy, don't do it. I told you. I really wanted to say, give me more proof, but I refrained. I would have had a lot more proof. I have to, Nick. It won't affect us. I still love you. She said it with a hint of a smile. I realized she was lying to me. I just need something different and just this once. I don't want you to do that, and if you go for it, there will be consequences, I said, shaking my head hoping to appear submissive, to which I reluctantly agreed. Mr. Carter, please let me do my job. Do you have a chair in your bedroom? He asked. He wanted to entertain my wife on our marital bed. Note to self, burn the bed and buy a new one. Yes, there is. Wait, you really want me there? I asked with a look of horror on my face. Yes, it's necessary, said Dr. Fool. If you insist, I growled. Doctor, is there really no other way to get my wife back to normal? I'm afraid not. He said it with a contrived sincerity that wouldn't fool a kindergartner. Well, I hope you don't expect me to commit adultery, I said. Mr. Carter, what your wife and I are going to do can hardly be called adultery. I'm simply helping her to overcome a mental block and perform better in your relationship. You'll both be stronger after we're done. He bestowed a smug smile on me at those words, and once again it took an Olympian effort of will not to shove the gun down his throat and fire the entire magazine at him. I won't agree to that, just so you know. I will never agree to an act of adultery between you and my wife, and that's what adultery is, no matter how you slice it. I said, noticing that he wasn't wearing a wedding ring and there was no tan line on his finger. Like I said, Mr. Carter, this is therapy. Sure, it's controversial therapy, but it's not adultery. This time, his smile was indulgent. Oh, this was going to be a lot of fun after some pain. Well, not pain. My love for Sammy was dead, and I felt numb and righteous anger at what I was going to do to that asshole after he was done entertaining my soon-to-be ex-wife. I'm still not going to agree. I shook my head, following them into the master bedroom. I discreetly pulled out my iPhone and started filming him undressing Sammy and laying her on the bed. She willingly spread her legs as he undressed, and neither of them looked in my direction as I sat in the chair and took many pictures. Last chance, you two, I said. Don't do this. It's being done without my consent. The doctor looked at me, at my iPhone sticking out of my jacket pocket, but didn't realize he was recording video. He grinned. Like you have a choice, wuss. Then he continued. That was all I needed to see. It was all I needed to record. Janine's case was now immutable, period. I got up from my chair and calmly walked over to him. I grabbed his hair, then I hit the bundle of nerves between his neck and shoulder, and it folded like a bad poker hand. Doctor, my ex-wife never told you what I do for a living, did she? I could see the confusion on his face. Sammy looked at me like I'd grown a third eye. I'm a private investigator, doctor. I have proof that you tried to seduce me with my wife. I now have the evidence necessary to divorce you for infidelity. I have video and audio recordings. I also have evidence of alienation of affection and dishonest labor. I grinned triumphantly, then reached into my belt and pulled out a gun. See, you're a big man, doctor. I could have lost to you in a fair fight, but Colonel Sam Colt makes all men equal in the eyes of God. You'll be able to move in a minute. As soon as you can, get dressed, get your whore and get out of here. I said this calmly and evenly, which scared the hell out of both of them. I heard Sammy sigh. Good. I looked at the woman who had just broken my heart. Samantha, you need to get dressed, pack your things, and get the hell out. What? She demanded. You heard me. I told you that there will be consequences if you go through with this, and those consequences will be very bad. I felt detached. I felt like my emotions weren't working the way they should. The consequences are going to start right now. You're going to pack up your things, put them in either your car or his SUV, and drive away. I'll call my attorney and have him prepare the divorce papers. And then I'll get a restraining order against you and the good doctor. I'm glad we don't have kids. And I'm damn glad I'll never be a father to your kids. I shook my head. Sammy, you broke my heart. I hope it was worth it for you. My voice cracked on the last sentence. If that lover wants nothing to do with you, go live with your parents. A whole range of emotions flashed across Sammy's face as she comprehended what I had just told her. Her main emotion was confusion. But Nick, don't you love me anymore? She asked, eyes wide in innocent shock. Not after you willingly allowed another man, despite my protests, to take you in our marital bed. I shouted that last word. You have desecrated the vows we made on our wedding day, Samantha. Because of my protests, you destroyed everything we had. Yes, I really let her have her way this time. I wanted her to feel the pain. I wanted her to feel the pain in my heart when I realized she didn't love me anymore. I can't believe I never knew you, Samantha. I called her by her full name because I knew she hated it and because she knew I only called her that when I was angry. Samantha, do you remember the conversation we had before we got married? The one about fidelity, do you remember that one? The one where you said you wouldn't tolerate cheating. The one where you said you wouldn't tolerate cheaters. Well, darling, this fits that definition. That day, I saw the wisdom in your words and accepted your philosophy. The asshole hissed before she could respond and seemed to be seriously considering pouncing on me. I stepped away from him, holding Sam's Colt at the ready. I also made sure to keep Samantha in my sights. You're making a mistake, Mr. Carter. I'm going to press charges. He grinned. No mistake at all. I caught you in bed with my wife and thought she was being raped. Who are the cops going to believe? The respected private investigator who caught the rapist or the man who claims it was consensual? Look at Samantha, doctor. Look at the anguish on her face. Misery. It's a good thing I got there in time, isn't it? Otherwise, you would have gotten away with it. Maybe I should call the police and report it. His face paled as he hesitated, but then changed his mind. Okay, it's no big deal, nothing bad. He tried to grin, but it didn't work. No accusations. I noticed he still hadn't mentioned his wife. That was interesting. Perhaps he thought he was keeping a secret from me, and I was allowing him that illusion for now. However, I had to give him a little nudge. I'm sure the news channels will be thrilled. A private investigator's wife caught in bed with her counselor. The story's at 11. I shook my head with a look of disgust on my face. Then he blushed. No, you can't go public with this. He was almost shouting. He dressed quickly, making sure he had everything he came with. Please, don't make this public, he begged. I held him back. If you pay back all the royalties my soon-to-be ex-wife paid you, I might consider it. But I'll still sue you for A and negligence, I said, cornering him. It's a deal. Anything you want, he said with a panicked expression in his eyes. Anything I want? Oh, what possibilities. But no, I wanted him to know fear. I wanted him to feel fear of the inevitable despair, the utter devastation his life was about to become. I enjoyed it and felt no guilt for deceiving him the way he had deceived me. The difference was that, while he was entertaining my wife, I was going to entertain his life, but in a slightly different way. I'm not sure how much fun he would have had. Sam, after getting dressed, he ran out of my bedroom and I heard the front door slam. He broke all speed records, rushing away from me and my house. I looked at Samantha, and I could tell she saw the anger in my eyes. Nick, we can get through this, she pleaded, crying crocodile tears. Please, baby. Where was baby when I came home, Samantha? Where was love then? I grinned. Get dressed, pack and leave, I said. You have an hour. Since Dr. Dumbass wants nothing more to do with you, I suggest your parents. Samantha just stared at me in utter shock. Then she started to get dressed and get ready. I let her use all 4 of our suitcases, knowing that I was going to buy new ones. I went into my home office and called the locksmith and the furniture store. I called the locksmith when he was already closing, but promised him a huge bonus for rush work on my locks. Then I told the furniture store I wanted a queen-size bed to replace our old double bed, sheets, comforter, and all. It was expensive, but it was worth it. He asked why I wanted to throw the old bed in the backyard, but I just told him I wasn't paying him to ask questions. He caught the tone in my voice and prudently slammed his trap shut. Samantha packed in 55 minutes, and as a gesture of generosity, I helped her carry her suitcases to the car. In other words, I dropped them in the driveway by the trunk of her car. Then I went back into the house and slammed the door behind me. I called Wes and asked him to apply for a restraining order with the night court judge. In my application, I named both Samantha and Dr. Dennis Linder. I then asked him to prepare papers for divorce, alienation of affection, and unfair labor practice. An hour later, both the locksmith and the furniture makers finished the job, and I paid them off with a credit card. I called my credit card company and canceled Samantha's cards. I then called my bank manager at home and asked him to cancel Samantha's debit card. I didn't explain anything, but as the primary owner of our accounts, I felt it was necessary. I no longer trusted her. For those who think I've gone too far, go to hell. I poured myself a couple shots of Chivas. I usually drink beer, and I like it better than any other beverage. However, I needed something stronger, so I poured myself a shot and started sipping it, thinking about what my marriage had become in such a short period of time. Around 7 p.m., I realized I was about to snap. I called Danny. "Hola, jefe," Danny said. "Hi, Danny. I hate to call you after hours, but I'm going to need your help tonight," I said. I was proud that 2 shots of Chivas hadn't disturbed my judgment or confused my words. "What's wrong, boss man?" she asked. I never managed to calm her down. "Well, it's complicated, and I don't want to tell you over the phone. Just come to my house," I said, feeling the walls start to crumble in my mind. "Okay, jefe, I'll be right there." She ended the conversation before I could respond. God bless that girl. 10 minutes later, she was already knocking on my door. I got up from my seat, staring at the blank TV screen, and went to open it. As soon as I opened the door, Danny rushed into my arms and hugged me tightly. She slammed the door shut behind her and then pulled away from our embrace to put the deadbolt back in place. Turning around, she grabbed my hand and pulled me back to the couch. She sat me down and sat next to me. "So where's Sammy?" she asked, already guessing what was going on. After all, Sammy's car wasn't in the driveway, and I wasn't as upset as I would have been if she had died. I looked into Danny's deep brown eyes. "She's gone, probably to her parents. She cheated on me, Danny." I couldn't hold back the tears any longer as she wrapped her arms around me and pulled me to her, and I ruined her blouse with my tears. I clung to her desperately, just needing human companionship. When I finally let it all out, Danny gently pushed me away and looked into my eyes. "Nick, listen to me. Are you absolutely sure that Sammy cheated on you?" Not trusting my voice, I pulled out my pocket voice recorder and, setting it on the coffee table, pressed the play button. I then opened my phone, brought up the video, and pressed play, then handed it to her. Danny watched and listened with growing terror in her eyes as I went to get 2 bottles of beer from the fridge. When I returned, a dark fire flashed in her eyes and she stopped both the recording and the video. I opened both bottles of Arrogant Bastard Ales and held one out to her. Isa maldita para polas." Danny finally exploded, taking a sip of the bitter ale. "That damn bitch." Wow, Danny couldn't help herself. I smiled crookedly at her words. Danny is loyal to the last detail, and she's loyal to me. She took another big sip, then closed her eyes and took a few deep breaths. "Nick, what are you planning?" she asked, placing her hand on mine. "Because whatever it is, I want in on it." A nuclear strike on the doctor. I have reason to believe that Samantha has been brainwashed. If that's the case, I want her to get the help she needs, I said, my voice hoarse from sobbing. If there was even the slightest possibility that asshole had somehow brainwashed or coerced her, I wanted to find out how. As for Dr. Cranberry himself, I want him and everyone around him burned, except for his wife, who you met earlier in the office. Turns out she was right when she said he was cheating, and with my own wife at that. That's some bullshit, Nick. Danny shook her head sympathetically. But okay, what's our first step? Reconnaissance, of course. I smiled strained, trying to hide my feelings. Now that I was on the job, it was easy to sink back into the image of a professional. I'm going to pay a little visit to his office in a few hours. If you're having trouble breaking in, you don't have to come. Screw it. I told you I'm in, Jefe. I'm in it to win it, and you know I'm not backing down. She smiled at me, then leaned forward and hugged me tightly. I know Sammy, Nick. I've known her almost as long as I've known you. I think she was at least forced into that convertible. I think so too, but even then I'm not sure I want her back. She's screwed us over. She's known the tool for 2 months now, and in that time he's managed to convince her that our marriage is just another toilet to shit in. I said this while still hugging her tightly. God, she was so good to the touch. I was sorely tempted to kiss her right then and there, but only two things stopped me. One, I hoped that Samantha was a victim of brainwashing or coercion, and that we could somehow work through it all. Two, even if she was more willing than she looked, I wasn't going to stoop to her level and cheat with anyone, even Danny. Danny, I know what you're thinking, and you have no idea how tempting it is right now, but we have work to do. I forced those words out of me with an ironclad effort of will. I strengthened my resolve and continued. We'll stop by the office and pick up the van. Great idea, boss, she said, holding back her feelings. It didn't take a rocket scientist to realize she'd always had a thing for me. We flirted with each other, but I thought she was just flirting. But now that Sammy was out of sight, at least for the moment, it was obvious that she wanted more. Part of me was dying to give her what she wanted, and that part of me wanted it as much as she did. But, and here's the rub, I wasn't going to do what my wife had done. No, my revenge would be far worse if things went the way I feared. Besides, I didn't want to hurt Danny, and I knew that if Sammy had really been coerced or brainwashed by Dr. Dumbass, Danny would suffer greatly if or when I decided to settle with Sammy. We left in her car and picked up the van at the office. I got Comcast magnets out of the trunk and stuck them on the sides of the van. Urban camouflage. I like it. We pulled up to Dr. Dennis Linder's office around 11 p.m., and I entered the building by picking the lock. I was wearing supple calfskin gloves that didn't leave fingerprints but still allowed enough freedom of movement to not interfere with my dexterity. It wasn't difficult to pick the lock, and once inside, I made sure my headphones were working properly so I could communicate with Danny. Reading you loud and clear, Jefe, she said. I had a small 50 GB USB drive with me. I was going to search his computer as well as his file cabinet. I wanted to investigate this guy's business properly. If he's doing this to my wife, I wonder how many other wives he's doing this to. I called the security company, introduced myself as Dr. Linder, and said I forgot my password. It's amazing what the power of a good bluff can do. I sounded authoritative, slightly pompous, and they bought it without even asking to confirm the password. Amateurs. Danny giggled through her earpiece. I know, right? I chuckled softly, picking the lock on the doctor's office. I headed over to his computer, bringing it out of sleep mode. There were no family pictures on his desk. Wow, he sure didn't love his wife. I shook my head, thinking about the fact that this asshole, who had a damn beautiful woman living at home, was dating at least one of his patients. Password protected. Shit, shit, shit. Okay, don't panic. I've analyzed everything I know about Dr. Linder. He was smart, but not very smart. He was cunning when it came to seducing women. On the way out, Danny laid out for me another batch of dirt on Dr. Deepfaker that she had dug up after I left. He was a serial womanizer, if you read between the lines of his other patients, who had filed malpractice suits against him or even accused him of harassment. Then those charges were dropped for no good reason. Just a trivial misunderstanding at the police station. I already hated this guy. Now I was ready to slowly destroy him. So, mindful of his womanizing tendencies, I typed Romeo as a possible password. Access denied. Casanova. Access denied. Lothario. Access granted. What a predictable asshole. Finding the files I needed wasn't hard either. Wow, that son of a bitch was presumptuous. I inserted the flash drive and downloaded the entire Special Patients section, which almost completely filled all 50 gigs of space. I crossed off a few names, including Samantha Carter. That damn bastard. He had video files of Sammy in here. Oh, okay, never mind. I removed the flash drive and put the computer in sleep mode. Then I went through his file cabinet. I found Sammy's file, but nothing in it indicated what they'd done, so he wasn't stupid enough to record his adventures in paper files. Anything, Heffy? Danny asked through the earpiece. Plenty, dear, I replied. Nothing paper, but I have about 45 gigs of video he recorded with a few of his patients. Damn it. Okay, we'll have to go through them when we get home, she said. I thought it was funny the way she pronounced we and home when talking about our plans for the near future. As I left the office, I made sure all the doors were locked and there was no sign that I had been here. No security cameras, just a phone call from a landline with an untraceable number. The voice ID could pose a problem if someone was interested, but I wasn't going to worry about that right now. It was well past 1 o'clock in the morning when we got back to my house. We went inside. I lowered the garage door, and before I could say anything, Danny gave me a dumbfounded look. I'm staying with you tonight, Nick. She said it firmly, leaving no room for argument. Okay, I shrugged. You can have the guest room. No, Nick. I'll stay in your room, in your new bed, and I won't take no for an answer. You don't have to be alone tonight. And then it was clear the invisible elephant had been revealed. Danny, I trust you. Hell, you're the only woman on earth I trust right now. I'm asking you, please, don't make me break my marriage vows tonight, okay? I asked. I promise. She smiled and kissed my cheek. We'll go over the footage in the morning. I brought my laptop with me so we can split the video and do it in half the time. Sounds like a plan, honey, I said, and headed for the shower. I felt dirty, and not just because I hadn't showered since I'd left for work the previous morning. As I stood under the jets of water, my mental compartment opened up and all the feelings of betrayal rushed back in. Suddenly, I heard the shower door open. She tucked me into bed, covered me with a sheet, and then walked around and climbed in on the other side. I was numb and fell asleep as soon as I closed my eyes. I was completely exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I woke up the next morning with a smile on my face. Danny stood up and hugged me tightly. Oh my God, she was completely on top of me. I decided to nip this in the bud. Danny, listen to me, okay? I wheezed. When she reluctantly nodded, I continued. Danny, I'm sorry for what I just said. I thought yesterday was just a horrible nightmare. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think of you that way sometimes, but I love my wife. Or who she was before that scumbag laid his hands on her. But I promise you one thing right now. If Samantha agreed to all of this willingly, I will divorce her. When that happens, if you still want me, I'll be willing to try it with you, okay? And that's one of the reasons I fell in love with you. She sighed regretfully. You're the most damn honest man I've ever met. There was equal parts admiration and despair in her voice. Thank you, sweetheart. When I went out to get dressed, Danny wasn't in the room, but I heard the sizzle of a frying pan in the kitchen. I smiled at that, then got dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, put on a belt with a holster from my Colt, and went out to her. I didn't normally carry a gun at home, but I wasn't about to take any chances with a possibly sociopathic psychologist outside. I noticed Danny was also carrying a gun. A woman's Smith & Wesson 9mm. She also got her concealed carry permit shortly after I hired her. Smells good, I said, smiling genuinely for the first time since this whole mess started. Thanks, Nick. She grinned sweetly and went back to the omelet she was making. I could smell the bacon, cheese, and salsa. She really knew her stuff. She was dressed in one of my old t-shirts and jeans that she had worn last night. Her blouse was still on the bedroom floor. Danny, I know this is going to be hard for both of us, I said, taking a seat on the bar stool by the kitchen counter. She looked at me and raised an eyebrow. Boss, I didn't sign up to be patronized. You made it clear from day one that you might need me on some cases, and given my background in criminal justice, you knew you could count on me. That hasn't changed, and it never will. I couldn't help but fall in love with you, but that doesn't mean I'm going to remove myself from this case. This case is personal to me too, because Sammy is my friend. That doctor is going to get a rude awakening when we're done with his ass. Every word she said was true. She'd worked as a detective for the LAPD for 2 years, but had been fired for beating up a suspect. She'd been lucky to avoid serious charges, but since the son of a bitch was guilty, they didn't want to prosecute her. She was given a small severance package to keep her mouth shut about the circumstances of her termination, but she told me candidly about it when I first interviewed her. That was one of the reasons I gave her the job. I needed someone who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Danny was definitely not afraid to get her hands dirty. Sometimes I just forgot about it. You're right, I nodded. Danny, I have to tell you things about myself that even Sammy doesn't know. I took a deep breath. I knew I could trust Danny. She trusted me, and I'd checked the veracity of who she was and why she'd been fired. What do you mean? She asked with a confused look on her face. Danny, I never worked for an insurance company. I worked for an own company as a covert operative. That was it. My name is Nick Carter, and I used to be a spy. And that sounds like a really bad impression of the beginning of the Burn Notice series. Danny just looked at me, then sliced an omelet and set it on the counter along with the mugs of coffee. God bless Danny. I kind of figured it out. Either that or you have a criminal record somewhere. She shrugged. You're always looking around like someone's watching you. You don't show it often, but I've noticed it over the years we've been together. You know a lot about bugs and how to tap a phone in record time. You also know how to pick locks, which makes you one of the best lock pickers out there. I laughed. She really was one hell of a detective. You're good, I said, picking up my coffee mug and taking a sip. Just right. Oh, and you make the best damn coffee on earth. Just so you know, I said. It was her turn to laugh. Thanks, boss, she said. I'm not just a pretty face and a hot body, you know. She winked. I know. If you were only that, I wouldn't have hired you. I shrugged. She leaned over and kissed my cheek. Thanks, Nick. No matter how things turn out, thank you for everything. She smiled. Hey, you act like you're going to leave. That's not going to happen. I smirked at her. You're going to work with me until we're both old and gray. She was silent for a moment. You know, you're right. She grinned. I couldn't leave you if I found a job that paid $1 million a day. Okay, I said, because I can't afford it, and you're the best damn assistant I could hope for. I'm glad you finally figured that out, boss. Now eat before I spank you. She stuck her tongue out, and I stuck mine out in response. Then I really got down to eating, and her omelet was surprisingly good. God, that girl can cook. There are two schools of thought on the way to a man's heart and what girls are taught. One is through the stomach, and the other is through the organ of copulation. For me, it's both. Of course, Sammy is a tornado in bed. She was my tornado in bed, and she was a good cook. But, and you knew it was going to be but, Danny's prowess in the kitchen easily threw Sammy off balance. If she entertained even half as well as she cooked, I would have seriously considered an exchange, even if Sammy had been brainwashed by Dr. Dumbass. This may sound cold, but she gave in easily without even discussing things with me. I couldn't believe she could go behind my back to a quack psychiatrist like Linder and not discuss anything with me. It wasn't like her. At the beginning of our relationship, she told me everything. It was only in the last couple months after starting therapy that she had almost completely shut herself off from me. When breakfast was over, I helped Danny wash the dishes. When she finished, she turned around and before I could react, she wrapped her arms around my neck and pulled my face to hers. I'm sorry, Nick, she said quietly. No, Danny. I don't think either of us are sorry about that. I chuckled. Damn, I wish I'd met you before my wife did. Me too, she said sadly. Damn it. Someone was going to get hurt no matter how things turned out. I really didn't want it to be either of them if Sammy was coerced or brainwashed. We had to see those videos. Let's go watch the videos. Maybe they'll shed some light on Sammy's mental state, I said. We went to the room where I kept my home office and I downloaded half of the videos onto her laptop. I started where I should have started, with Sammy. The first interview was pretty straightforward. Just an introduction. Dr. Dicksocker was writing something down in a notebook, asking Sammy questions about her life. He asked about her husband, me, and other relatives. She told him about her parents and how much she loved us all. I studied his face. A sly smile played on his lips. Then he asked a few more innocuous questions and then told her not to tell anyone about it, as it might negatively affect their future therapy sessions. What a son of a bitch. He was going to seduce her from the beginning. And since she was following his instructions to keep me in the dark and I had no idea what was going on, I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. He abused her trust in him as a medical professional. Negligence suit? Check. There were more questions in the second clip, more personal this time. He asked her about our lives. He just wrote down every answer she gave in his infernal notebook. He asked a few more personal questions that she didn't seem to want to answer, but he assured her that no one would ever know what she said. She again answered honestly. At the end, he reiterated again that the session should be confidential. She agreed. I checked the dates on the videotapes. There were 16 videotapes of Sammy's sessions, and that corresponded to his Monday and Wednesday appointments. I groaned, covering my face with my hands. The third video was hard to watch, but again, he didn't brainwash her or make her do anything but professional ethics, as he called it. In the fourth video, he began his devious seduction in full. He asked her to describe her fantasies in detail. She managed to recount 2 of them before time ran out. Again, a non-disclosure agreement, and she was on her way. The fifth and sixth videos were very similar to the fourth. She told him about her fantasies. He reminded her that each video had to be confidential, and she agreed. The rest of the videos were also conversations about her fantasies, somehow related to her cheating. By the end of the 14th video, he had raised her self-esteem to the level of selfishness and convinced her to have 2 men, including me, as part of her therapy. I noticed that starting with this video, he didn't encourage her to keep quiet knowing that she wouldn't tell anyone, including me. This was the 15th video where he first entertained her. Just under a week and a half ago, he told her he would be a second man if that's what she wanted. She looked like she struggled with that decision for a full 15 minutes as he gently nudged her into what he wanted her to think. Finally, she gave in. The 16th roller was the last one. It was pretty much the same. But this time she asked her to keep it a secret and she would call him herself, on the right day and hour. I stopped the video and looked up to see Danny looking at me with tears in her eyes and an expression of disgust on her face that probably reflected my own disgust. This guy was a serial seducer, a real Lothario. At least that was clear from his password on his computer. I'm going to hit that son of a bitch with a warhead so powerful he'll wish he'd never been born, I vowed in a calm voice in front of God and Danny. I agree with you on that one, boss, she said, taking a seat on the edge of my desk. It seems like the longer videos are harder to give. If it makes you feel better, all the others are shorter than Sammy's. Apparently she lasted the longest. She shrugged and smiled encouragingly. I kind of guessed that since everyone else here is shorter than her, but you just confirmed it. This guy makes Machiavelli look like a good guy. I shook my head. But as far as coercion or brainwashing goes, he's not guilty on those counts. He's just convincing them to do it, and no harm will come of it. Yeah, I've noticed that too. As far as I can tell, he never involved the husband in his little games before. But then the husband somehow finds out about it and divorces his wife. All the cases I checked ended in divorce. She listed the names of the women and their ex-husbands. Okay, contact a couple of the exes and find out how they found out about Dr. Dumbass seducing their wives. I need to talk to Janine. I escorted her out of the room, then pulled out my cell phone and called Janine's phone. Hello? Janine, it's Nick, I said in a squeezed voice. Oh, Nick, thanks for calling. Are you going to start your investigation today? She asked. Actually, I've already finished it. You were more right than you think. Would you mind coming by my place today or tomorrow? We have some things to discuss, both personal and professional. Don't get me wrong. I'm not pestering you, but this issue is very close to my heart, I explained. Would you like to talk more about it, Nick? She asked. Not over the phone, ma'am. Better tonight or tomorrow morning. My assistant Danny will be with us. She has information for you as well. I told her. What's your address? I gave her my address and she said she would be here in 10 minutes. 11 minutes later, I heard a car pull up to the driveway. I checked. She arrived in a beautiful Jaguar XJ6. I opened the door for her. Danny brought coffee and I went and got mine and Danny's laptops. I set both on the coffee table and Danny and I sat down on either side of Janine as I started to explain. Janine, Dennis is a serial con man who uses his professional authority and credibility to seduce women and cuckold their husbands behind their backs, I said. From what we've seen so far, he preys only on married women. There are no single women in these videos, Danny added. Every episode of the video is about seduction. He gains their trust, then talks about fantasies or problems in their marriage. Using this information, he seduces them and gets them to do exactly what he wants. He doesn't force his victims or brainwash them. But, as you can see, he is a serial offender, I said, showing her all the series of videos. She gasped at the sheer number of them. How the hell could he keep this a secret? She screamed, her face turning beet red with rage. Janine, calm down, please. This isn't over, I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. More? She looked at me like I'd just fallen off another planet. Yes, ma'am. As I said on the phone, this case is very close to my heart. You see, my wife has become its latest victim. I showed her Samantha Carter's name on the video I had highlighted. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Nick. Janine hugged me tightly. He's going to pay for this. You can be sure of that. He's going to pay through the goddamn ass I'm going to give him for this shit. Janine, how much is your husband worth monetarily? I'll sue him for alienation of affection and negligence, I said. Don't worry. I'll introduce you to the best divorce attorney in California. Wes will take care of you and get you as much as he can. Janine laughed. Oh, honey, Dennis is worth over $250 million, including his properties around the world. He has a lucrative practice, his books are bestsellers, and he's been a guest on Dr. Phil several times. But he made most of his money from his books. Okay, I propose we hit him with a blitzkrieg. We'll hit him hard and fast, but it will probably take a few days to prepare. Do you trust us? I asked, pointing to myself and Danny. Yes, she replied. You've lost a lot too, Nick. I'm sorry about that. I should have seen what a snake he is sooner. I understand. Come by my office in the morning and I'll introduce you to Wes. He's my attorney and will be handling my divorce from Samantha as well as my lawsuits against your husband. But by Friday, we hope to bring in other ex-husbands to sue him for malpractice and alienation of affection. I outlined my plan to her, and by the time I was done, she was nodding and smiling. I can go along with that. The problem is acting normal with him for 2 more days. I can claim I have a problem with women, or I can just go out of town to see my mom. She's old, so he'll probably buy that. Janine nodded. Right. He's trained to notice differences in mood or behavior. My advice is to contact your mother, tell her what's going on, and ask her to cover for you. In the meantime, I have a guest room here with a double bed and room for 2 more cars in the garage. I smiled. So far, only my car and Danny's car were parked there. I handed her the garage door remote and she gratefully accepted it. She went home to pack her things. Danny went home to pack her stuff too. She packed her clothes for the week and returned a half-hour later. I giggled as I watched her haul her stuff into my room and put it in Sammy's old dresser. The girl is determined. You have to hand it to her. The next morning, Janine returned just as I got out of bed after another great night's sleep with Danny by my side. Danny was in the shower when I heard the garage door open. Janine looked great. She gave me a sympathetic hug when I came out to greet her as soon as she entered the house. She had a small suitcase with her, along with a couple changes of clothes. She also brought me Danny's boys' account statements, and I awed when I saw how many liquid assets he had. When Danny made breakfast for all of us and we ate another great meal, Janine said she was ready to move on. I told her we could move as soon as all the ex-husbands and wives were made aware of the latest developments. We needed to call the 11 ex-husbands and then let them know to call their ex-wives and inform them of what was going on. We were going to file separate lawsuits against Dr. Dump Truck for negligence and alienation of affection, and they were more than happy to join us. Not surprisingly, most of the husbands were ready to get revenge on Zazrans, and most of the ex-wives were ready to do the same. But I wasn't about to get Sammy involved, not after I saw that last video. I showed up at Wes's office along with 9 of the 11 ex-husbands we were able to contact and all 9 ex-wives. Since I was ex-husband #12, I had to be involved in the case. Wes, to save time, drew up identical A of A and malpractice papers and just put different names in there depending on who was in line. It was like a kid in a candy store. Over $175 million in liquid assets for Dr. Dumbass and nearly $100 million in real estate worldwide that would likely have to be liquidated to pay for malpractice, divorce, and the A of A. Sure, a class action would have been easier, but in this case we were aiming for shock value. I wanted Dr. Dennis Threat Linder to know that his world was about to crumble around him like the walls of cursed Jericho. Janine and me and Danny waited at the end of the line while Wes happily helped a new crowd of clients make this asshole's life miserable and get rich in the process. Yeah, he's a good buddy of mine, but he's still a lawyer. When he finally finished printing out the malpractice and misdemeanor papers for his new clients and sent them on their way, promising to deliver them to Dr. Dingus at work early Monday morning with plenty of witnesses, it was Janine and I's turn. I filed for divorce from Samantha and Janine from her soon-to-be very poor ex-husband. Wes took an immediate liking to Janine, and the attraction seemed to be mutual. We agreed with Wes that each client's belongings would be delivered by a different bailiff at the same time. Wes, Janine, and Danny joined me and grinned like skeletons. The auditorium would be crowded on Monday morning, and Danny, Janine, Wes, and I were to sit in the front row. As a bonus, Wes gave each of us, his clients, a free restraining order against Dr. Dumbass. He knew how rich he would get when all the fallout from this massive nuclear strike settled. Then came the time for Phase 2. Phase 2 was to saturate the media and law enforcement. I used video clips of Sammy, removing her face and replacing her voice with a computer-generated one, removing all mention of her or my names, using a new media editor program I bought. I spliced together excerpts from different videos, showing how Dr. Dennis Linder made a habit of seducing women leaving happy marriages, or marriages that could have been happy after his therapy, but he saw fit to destroy those marriages for the sake of his own twisted ego. I used excerpts from other women's videos, showing how they all manipulated their husbands at Leander's insistence. I knew the media would eat this story up. The FBI would be brought up on charges of criminal negligence because he ripped off men and did it to their wives. The California Board of Psychologists would also take an interest in the case. To do this, I created a dummy email account and used proxy servers so I couldn't be traced. Phase 2 began on Monday morning, just after the process servers had done their work. As the last process server was leaving, I handed Janine a bucket of popcorn, and she was just crunching popcorn when Danny Boy came running out of the office, looking around wildly. He saw me standing next to his soon-to-be ex along with Danny. I picked up my cell phone, hit the send button on bulk email delivery, and started Phase 2. We got in my car and drove off while Dr. Dykes incoherently screamed that he was going to kill us all. The last thing I saw that day was him kneeling in the parking lot with a whole pile of papers in his hands and crying hard. My revenge wasn't even half finished. On step 3, we met Samantha, and she agreed. She was staying with her in-laws and was about to find out she couldn't stay there anymore unless she was very lucky. We met in a very public place, Starbucks. I love that place. "I'm here. Does that mean you want to talk?" she asked hopefully, sitting down across from me. "I actually have something to tell you," I said with a smile. "Samantha, I can forgive you anything if you were coerced or brainwashed by that asshole. I'm not kidding. But after 16 hours of you agreeing to everything he said, even your protests, you finally suggested I become a cuckold to fulfill your fantasies of dominance. That's something I can neither forgive nor forget." I shook my head slowly. "Sammy, I would have done almost anything for you. I loved you more than you can imagine. Loved, past tense. I would have given my life for you until I saw this betrayal. This final betrayal of everything we meant to each other. I'm sorry, Samantha, but you've already gotten the summons." I held out the divorce papers to her. "I think you'll find it fair." She looked at the papers in shock. "You're kidding me. I wasn't in my right mind, baby. Please, you have to believe me." She panicked, and that's when I put the other shoe down. "If I were you, I'd figure out what to tell your parents, Samantha. Something tells me they just received an anonymous letter that will show them what kind of daughter they've raised." I stood up and walked out, leaving her in stunned silence. Wes asked Janine out on a date, and she accepted. I vouched for his honesty, as honest as it was. When she asked about it, I said, "He's a divorce lawyer." I shrugged. "Then I'll just have to keep an eye on him." She grinned. "But seriously, he's a nice guy. I wouldn't work with him if he wasn't," I said, reassuring my friend. The next day, Wes called me and told me that Sammy and her lawyer were here and wanted to talk. I agreed and went, taking Danny with me for moral support. "Okay, I'm here," I said, sitting down across from Sammy and her lawyer. who looked a bit like Gloria Allred, and Danny sat down with me and Wes. Mr. Carter, I'm Jean Albrook. I'll be representing your wife in this case. From what she's told me, you've completely destroyed her, so I'm taking on her case pro bono. Let me begin by saying that these terms are unacceptable. She ended her initial tirade. Miss Albrook, let me point out that I have enough evidence to sway any judge and jury in the world to my point of view. They indicate that my soon-to-be ex conspired with her lover to deceive me. It was even her suggestion. For your information, I don't like that lifestyle and never will. Under the circumstances, I believe my offer is more than adequate. I finished, leaning back in my chair. And where is this evidence? Allred Jr. asked. Wes, God bless him, opened the DVD that had the last two sessions between Samantha and the good doctor recorded on it. He also put on the DVD a recording from my pocket recorder and a video from my iPhone. The video showed them planning the whole thing, where she would play a confused and helpless victim who just wants to explore herself and Dr. Linder coaxes her. Then my own voice recorder came on the screen as I walked in and caught them together. Then an iPhone video of them having fun on our marital bed. Then I ripped the video off her and throw it on the floor. I have the rest if you want it, Wes says with a wicked grin. Just say the word and I'll make copies for you. Gloria Jr. looked like she'd be happy to be anywhere but here at the moment. She looked at the proposal I'd asked Wes to put together. It was pretty fair considering the shit she'd put me through. She was getting $75,000 and a car on top of that. She'll get her stuff, which she'll take at my discretion, and she'll be given an apartment paid for by me for a year. No kids, so no alimony. And no alimony. That's what I gave up. There was no way I was going to pay her until she remarried. But at least the apartment was nice. After consulting with Samantha, Gloria's younger clone looked at me. We agree, Mr. Carter. Good decision. I smiled. We all signed our signatures, Jean notarized them, and in 30 days the case was to go before a judge. Those 30 days stretched so damn slow, I wanted to tear my hair out. Every day, Danny and I kissed like teenagers, but I still couldn't go all the way with her. I wanted to, like you wouldn't believe, but I was stubborn, or, as some would say, stupid. By the end, I was leaning towards stupidity myself. Finally, the trial date came. We hadn't had any cases since the Leander case, so it was insanely satisfying to wait for the clock to start ticking so we could officially be together. When the judge hit the gavel, I hugged Danny and kissed her in a way that made our toes tippy-toe. As we were parting ways, Sammy came up to us. I'm really sorry, Nick, for what it's worth. I ruined the best thing I had going for me. There were tears in her eyes as she looked at Danny. Danny, please take care of him and don't be as stupid as I am. Sammy, I've been in love with Nick since I first saw him. I kept my distance because he loved you with everything he had. I kept my distance because you were my friend too. You're both my friends, but when you did what you did to him, I couldn't stand by anymore. I'm not sorry either. I love that man, and I promise I will take care of him for the rest of our lives. Danny surprised me with that too. But what truly surprised her was Sammy, who hugged her friend tightly. And Danny moved in with me for the duration of the 30-day wait. We had plenty to do while we waited for my stupidity to subside or for the divorce to take place. When we got home from court, I took off my old wedding ring and threw it on the coffee table, then picked Danny up in my arms and carried her into our bedroom. It was 2.5 years before the effects of my nuclear strike on Dr. Dennis Linder had completely worn off, and many people had felt its effects in one way or another. Several couples separated by that asshole's actions eventually reconciled and remarried, receiving compensation for their wrongful death claims. Good for them. Good for them. I heard about Samantha shortly after all the malpractice and personal injury lawsuits were settled in court against Dr. Diptard. Samantha now lives in Vegas and has become a dominatrix. That seems to be right up her alley with the crap Leander uncovered in her psyche. Her parents still aren't talking to her thanks to the fact that I gave her a surgical strike by sending them a video of her and her lover plotting against me. Oh well, she brought it on herself. After Janine divorced him and got a lot more than half, all the criminal charges came down on old Denny like a ton of bricks. He pleaded guilty but lost his license and had to file for bankruptcy after all the legal proceedings were over. However, that didn't stop everyone he wronged from getting what they deserved. It only delayed them a bit. Someone, who shall remain nameless, visited the good doctor the evening before his criminal trial began. Whoever it was beat Dr. Douchebag so badly that he had to be hospitalized for several weeks. He had both knees shattered, both arms broken, and both balls torn. As for how I know all this, don't ask me questions and I won't lie to you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to clean my old aluminum baseball bat. Wes and Janine dated for 6 months and became so close they got married, with me as best man and Danny as maid of honor. Wes has earned enough from all the trials to retire, and they plan to spend their golden years together. The trial was pretty much open and shut because Dr. Fool's lawyer couldn't get the video of Ascolio seducing all those women into evidence. He was convicted on all counts. And when Denny went to prison, he only lasted 2 days before guards found him wobbling in his cell. Apparently, he fell so hard and so fast that he hung himself rather than accept what his life had become. That's good. One less burden on society. The asshole who ruined so many lives is now literally on death's doorstep. Seems appropriate to me. After his death, since he never changed his will, Janine was happy to use the large sum of money she inherited to pay off those whose lives her now deceased ex-husband had ruined. As for Danny and I, we profited like fat cats from my lawsuits. $15 million in total. $15 million, I said, putting my pinky to my mouth. We are now retired too and raising 2 children. Our son, Nicholas, since Danny insisted on giving him his full name, which of course I immediately agreed to, is still a baby and will be going to kindergarten next year. Isabel, our daughter, is the sweetest little girl I have ever seen. Now we are happy. This case, my last case, was ambiguous for me, but in the end it ended well. At the end. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.